As I said, this is the fourth of four foundations. I'll briefly a couple of times go over the other three. Again, they'll sound somewhat familiar to you, but just to remind you, the first foundation is that of the body, where we always start. Any meditation instruction, pretty much, any retreat, we'll start with centering our attention in the body and then feeling the breath. This is what the Buddha tells us to do right there in the beginning of the sutta. Be in the body, know the breath, sense the breath, know the nature of the breath, the texture of the breath, and then use the breath to calm the body, to calm the mind. So this feels pretty familiar. It then goes on to a number of other instructions about being mindful of the body in action, in movement, in eating, in walking, in dressing, in bathing, and all the activities that we might undergo in a day, mindfully throughout that. It's got a couple of sections that we don't teach very often. The 32 parts of the body, where we track in this very minute detail. Of course, anatomically, there's many more than 32, but it's a pretty comprehensive list of the parts of the body. And it's a very powerful and concentrated practice that, again, we don't teach that often. There are teachers who really love that section and teach it a lot. Bob Stahl, you may be familiar with, does retreats and classes on it. It's very powerful practice. But it's a whole art and practice of its own. We don't teach it that much. There's death or corpse contemplations, where we get in touch with the nature of this body that is going to grow old, sicken, and then die, and then decompose. Again, can find specialized teachings on this, but we don't include that as much in our regular instructions. All really helpful practices. The next section, the second foundation, is Vedana, or feeling tone. Again, you may be familiar with this term. It's this quality of pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant, you could say neutral, that every experience arising at one of the six sense doors has as we register it. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And we get to know that from that, the pleasant we crave, try to hold on to, the unpleasant we push away, and the neutral we space out about. So again, very important. The third section is mind states, chitta, all of the states of mind. Beautiful states, difficult states, greed, aversion, delusion, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, concentrated states, etc. So again, something we commonly teach in our meditation instructions. And then this last section, fourth, is usually, it's titled Dhammas, mindfulness of Dhammas, and it's complicated because someone is not muted, so if we could mute that person, just a bit of background noise. That's one of the reasons it's complicated. This word Dhamma has so many meanings. It means the truth of things, the way things are, the teachings of the Buddha, but it's really, in this context, Dhamma principles. The refrain in this sutta is also important because it points us to, in all of these foundations, they're conditioned. They arise due to conditions, pass due to conditions. And so we're invited into understanding the impermanent, uncontrollable nature of our moment-to-moment experience. So it's often called the insight section. And you could do a whole class just on the teaching there. So again, in those few minutes, a lot of concepts, hopefully some that sound familiar, but if not, just know that there's a lot more to explore if this is new for you. So in this fourth foundation, we'll go through it more, obviously, in the Dhamma talk, but before the meditation, I just wanted to give you a sense of what's in there. And I will now do my first screen share and hopefully see how this works. This is the terrain that we'll be covering today. On the left-hand side are the lists that are included in this foundation. The 5 hindrances, which you're probably familiar with if you've had any meditation instructions. The 5 aggregates, again, perhaps not so familiar. but in the Buddha's teachings, very important. The six sense spheres. So that's our five physical senses that we're usually familiar with. In Buddhism, we include the mind. The seven awakening factors. Again, you may be familiar with those, these positive qualities that we develop as we deepen in our meditation practice. And then lastly, the Four Noble Truths, this central teaching of the Buddha. So that's a lot right there. And under each one, there's five hindrances, five aggregates, six sense spheres, seven awakening, four noble truths. You'll see the Buddha's love of lists and grouping things. One of the reasons the Buddha liked lists is that, as I said earlier, that wasn't written down, so people had to memorize these things. So if you knew, oh, there's five of something and you can only remember four, you'd go to your Dhamma friend and say, hey, what was that one? I got these four, but I don't remember. And so it gave you a clue that you were missing something. So five of this, six of that, seven of that. I'll put this slide up later as we're going through this, but I just wanted to lay this out because what the Buddha does is for each of these sections, there's a series of practices that he gives us. So you're getting a sense of the complexity of this. Put that away now. But the main, or maybe I'll put it, no, I won't. The main thrust, if you remember those lists, the main thrust and what I'm going to keep coming back to and what I want you to remember is it's recognizing what's difficult, unskillful, disturbing in our experience, and knowing how to minimize that. Buddha would often say, let go or abandon. Recognize those states that cause us suffering, basically, and learn how to work skillfully with them. Not through aversion or rejection, but through clear recognition of what's difficult, where we get caught, what's disturbing, what's painful. And then in the same way, what's skillful, what's beautiful, what's wholesome, the factors of awakening, insight, understanding, how to recognize those when they're present and cultivate them, support them, help them to grow. This is the basic thrust. We're asked to be engaged in our meditation practice with this view of developing a set of skills to decrease the difficult, the painful, the hindrances, the unskillful, and to increase the beautiful qualities of mind and heart. So again, if you don't remember anything apart from that, that's the most important thing that I'll keep coming back to. And that's central to all of the Buddha's teachings. Minimize, abandon, let go, the difficult, the unskillful, increase, cultivate the beautiful qualities of mind and heart. So that will be the theme of our meditation session this morning. And again, one of the challenges with the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, because it's so complex, you can't just say, oh, practice with this. Like Vedana is fairly, it's not, it's simple, it's not necessarily easy, but it's not complicated. You can get a sense of it. This has so much in it. So I'm just going to pick the hindrances and the factors of awakening and give you some sense of how you might work with that in your meditation practice. And if the guidance is too complicated, again, just rest back, come back to a sense of the body, breath, sounds, whatever works for you. Let the words go. But that's what we'll practice with. And we'll sit 20 minutes or so with the slow start, and I've spoken a little longer. Yeah, about 10, 15. Okay, so take your meditation posture, get comfortable. And the Buddha's instructions is to find a quiet, secluded place and sit down with your spine erect. He does talk about crossing one's legs, but we don't need to do that. I'm sitting in a chair. But the important thing that he focuses on in this sutta is that your spine is erect. So that's the main uh, instruction we want to follow for our posture, is that the back is relatively straight and upright. So he talks about the spine being erect, and then he talks about using the breath to calm the body. So we open to a sense of the body sitting, we invite sense of uprightness, but then we balance that with ease, softening, relaxing. So softening around the face, the eyes, the mouth, the jaw, letting your shoulders be dropped, allowing the belly to be soft, responding to the breath moving in and out. Any places of tension or tightness that you can recognize that draw your attention. Let your mindfulness be spacious enough to include those, not focus on them, just include them. And on an out breath, see if there can be a little bit of softening or relaxing or releasing. Not pushing away or rejecting, but out of compassion. Can this be softened, relaxed, released? And then in this sense of the body sitting here, alert yet comfortable, you probably notice the movement of the breath. Letting your awareness of the breath be very spacious and relaxed. All the ways the breath moves the body, through the entrance at the nostrils, perhaps a sense of the cool air coming in, then the expansion of the chest and abdomen, and then the relaxing on the out breath, warm air leaving the body. Very simple, very direct, felt sense of the breath. But including all of the ways the breath moves the body. We're not narrowing down the focus to a small area, but the sense of the whole body as you breathe. Do your shoulders lift? Do your arms move with the breath? Shoulder blades moving, back moving. Having a very inclusive awareness of the breath in the body. What's the furthest extent that you can notice that the breath moves in the body? Perhaps you can feel it in your thighs or your hands. You can stay with awareness of breath like this, or if it's familiar and easy for you, your attention is naturally drawn to a smaller area like the upper lip, the nostrils, or the chest or abdomen. Whatever works to help maintain this connection with the simple sensations of in and out breathing. And sooner or later, we'll be pulled away from just being with the breath because something else happens. We have a thought, a memory of something difficult or challenging. Perhaps the mind moves into the future with worry and planning. Or there's some sensation in the body that's uncomfortable. This is very natural. This is what happens. Our practice is to include that in our awareness, in our mindfulness. Can we recognize that disturbance, whatever it is? Know it as thinking or worrying or remembering. Or perhaps it's some mood, emotion, sadness, or restlessness, or dullness, sleepiness. If a thought has some persistence, it's often accompanied by sensations in the body, be tightness or heaviness. If there's something like this happening, physical sensation that's difficult, mental construct that's challenging, can you give it a name? Aching, numbness, pressure, worry, sadness. Sleepiness. This is the beginning of practicing with the Fourth Foundation of Mindfulness, recognizing these more complex experiences and naming them. But what the Fourth Foundation invites us to do is to recognize this disturbance is actually a hindrance to our capacity to be fully present with our intended meditation object, in this case, the breath and the body. It's coloring the mind. It's obscuring our ability to be at ease with the present moment. So we can name this disturbance as a hindrance, perhaps even the kind of hindrance it is. Is it some kind of ill will or aversion, pushing away? Or is it wanting, sensual desire, trying to get some more pleasant experience? Is it our old friend's sleepiness or restlessness? Or perhaps it's just doubt, not sure what to do, what's happening, what am I meant to be focusing on? These are all different hindrances. We can recognize a difficult experience as a hindrance, name it as a hindrance, name the kind of hindrance, and begin to understand its nature. It's arisen, wasn't here a while ago, now it's here, and that it will pass. So again, may not be anything of these hindrances coming up for you, but even if it's something subtle, a little bit of irritation, too much talking, that's a hindrance because it's bringing with it suffering, difficulty. Just play with this for a few minutes. And in the same way, perhaps what you're noticing is something that's pleasant in your experience. It's actually a sense of ease or well-being or calm. These positive experiences we also want to recognize. Could be very subtle. A few moments of just being with the breath, without a disturbance, without being lost in thought. We want to recognize those moments. Perhaps it's a sense of ease in the body, a relaxation, or a sense of alertness, that the mind feels quite bright and interested. In the same way, we can know that experience on a mental level, but also its physical manifestation, what it feels like, that the mind be calm and settled, or bright and alert. These are variations of the factors of awakening. We want to recognize the calming factors and the energizing factors. And of course, mindfulness is at the center of them. Even just recognizing that we're clearly mindful of the breath is a positive mind state. So if anything like that is happening, can you recognize it? Sometimes we don't give ourselves permission to know that there's calm or peace or acceptance. But it's important to also recognize what's skillful and wholesome and beneficial in our meditation. So name whatever experience it is that you're having. Get a sense of how it's manifesting in the mind and the body. And you put it into the category of one of the factors of awakening, of investigation or energy or joy or tranquility, concentration or equanimity. You're familiar with them, but just if if it's a positive sense of well-being, just naming that. And then allowing that, breathing with that sense of well-being and ease, knowing the conditions that support that sense for you. Just direct experience. Did everyone hear the bell? No? I guess that didn't work. Sorry. I tried a digital bell, and I guess it didn't. I heard it. No one heard a bell? Ding. I'm sorry. It came through beautifully in my through my headphones. I'll have to figure out how to do that. Oh well. Um, so as I said at the beginning, this is not an easy section of this sutta to dive into, and as a meditation instruction, it's a little cumbersome because there's so much in this whole section. But well, I'll leave at the end. We'll have time for questions and comments. Maybe get a sense of whether you saw how this is actually one of the things why I like to teach this is people can recognize, oh, I'm already doing this. This has kind of been folded into how I've understood the meditation instructions, especially if you've been, on a residential retreat where they've unfolded over a number of days. You get a sense of how these skillful means are introduced in other ways over and over again with this theme of recognizing the hindrances, learning how to work with them skillfully, and recognizing the wholesome, which unfortunately I don't think we do as much and we should do more of, recognizing the wholesome, the skillful, and learning how to really cultivate, support, embody, grow those beautiful qualities. There's a whole insight theme woven through this that's also important, but the diminishing the unskillful, recognizing and growing the skillful is really important in this sutta. And so, as I said, it's the extension of these other three foundations. The other three foundations give us the basis of practice and understanding that this starts to make sense. So the first foundation of the body, as we said, most of us very familiar with, where every meditation instruction starts. Be in your body, turn your attention to your felt experience, be with breath, sounds, movements, experiences of the body. And then this second one, Vedana, the feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, a whole exploration of its own, of what we do with that. And then the mind, all of the different states of mind, beautiful states of mind, difficult states of mind, states in meditation, whether the mind is liberated or not, how much freedom there is in the mind. What's happening with each of these earlier foundations is they're getting more and more subtle. So the body, the first one, is, elemental, right? You could say gross. It's the grossest, as in the most solid. And then Vedana, feeling tone, a little more subtle, but still quite clearly recognizable. Or something's pleasant or unpleasant. Neutral is a little harder, but still. And then the mind, working with the mind. This is actually the main work in meditation, is developing a skillful relationship and understanding of the mind. But if we started with mind, I think most of us would get lost because there's not enough of the steadiness, the calm, the connection, the ease that we can cultivate with mindfulness of the body. In the third foundation, we're asked to be aware of these different contents or expressions in the mind, some negative ones, some wholesome ones. What I love about it, it is very non-judgmental. In the foundation, we're just asked to know, is this quality present or not present? And it goes through a whole list, as I said, greed, aversion, delusion, non-greed, non-aversion, non-delusion, different states of concentration or lack of concentration. But it's very non-judgmental. All we're asked to do is know, is this present or not present? What we can start to learn from that teaching or that practice is sometimes just recognizing something is enough to actually diminish or release when it's difficult, or cultivate and support when it's wholesome, just through the recognition of it. But the fourth foundation goes even more deeply into that possibility. It asks us to look at the context within which all of those experiences are happening. not just the experience itself, but what are the conditions that supported that condition, that supported that experience happening? And if it's a difficult one, what helps us to release it? If it's a positive one, what helps us to grow it? If it's a place we're caught, what helps us to let go? So we're asked to see the context and to learn, as I keep repeating, because this is the most important thing, how do we let go, diminish, abandon the difficult ones, and how do we grow, support the wholesome ones? And again, how do we, in this moment, with the experience we're having right now, turn towards more freedom, turn towards less suffering? So this is the deep pointing of the Fourth Foundation of Mindfulness, that with the experience we're having right now, whether it's a difficult one where we're really lost in clinging and identification or addiction to one of the six senses, or it's a beautiful experience, how do we find more freedom, more happiness, more ease with that experience? So it's a whole process of understanding why things are happening in our meditation practice, our formal practice, but it's really important in daily life as well, because it's basically saying here, you have this amazing capacity to be aware. Use it. Use it to understand your experience. This is the brilliance of the Buddha's teaching. Turn and look at your own experience. From that understanding, learn for yourself with your particular conditioning and experiences and capacities, how to diminish the experiences that create suffering, and not just suffering for ourselves, but suffering for others, and how to cultivate more happiness and more freedom in this moment. And of course, it's also developmental. We grow that capacity. So it's also saying, here's practices that you can do to have more potential for that kind of liberation. So it's bringing a Dhamma understanding to our meditation practices and to all experiences. So we'll go through each section now. And as I intimated before, there's all of these sections. Each section has many layers to it. I can just skim the surface. Some of them will be familiar to you, some perhaps quite new, but keep coming back to what's the theme that we're asked to do here. So again, I will do a screen share of this. So it's up there in front of you. Is that showing up okay? All in? Yeah. So we're asked to contemplate dhammas, and sometimes this gets translated as mind objects, but and basically it is, as I said, a mind training, but it includes everything. I like one of our colleagues, Tarania, calls this foundation seeing the Dhamma in the Dhammas. And as I said before, Dhamma has many, many meanings, but it means the truth of things, the way things are. It also means the teachings of the Buddha. So it's seeing how things are, the truth of things, through the lens of the teachings of the Buddha. So again, we've got the 5 hindrances, the 5 aggregates. Again, this is probably the one that's the least familiar for most people. The 6 sense spheres, 7 factors, and the 4 noble truths. What there is for each of these is a set of practices. Can you see my cursor running across? So I'm kind of like a pointer. Okay. So we're just like the hindrances, is it present or not present? Aggregates, this is what they're like. The 6 sense spheres, we know that we're having that experience. Again, the 7 factors is kind of like the hindrances, they're present or not present. And then the 4 noble truths, it literally goes through the 4 noble truths. So as I said, what we're asked to do is look more closely at our experience to recognize not just is something present, but also is something not present. This is something we don't often do, think about what's not here. But if we've ever been roiled by hindrances, a hindrance, really taken over by desire or ill will, to recognize its ending, that it's actually not here, that's actually liberating. So even that is perhaps a different practice than we're usually doing. And what we're asked to do is use our contemplative or reflective or capacity for inquiry to actually look more closely at our experience. So this is reflective thought. It's not proliferating thought where we're wondering and worrying and questioning with a lot of disturbance around it. It's like, this is here. What is this? And what's the impact it's having on me? And what's a skillful response to this? This is contemplation. So in meditation, and especially in mindfulness teachings, we're often, not often, we're always reminded to be in the present moment, right? Present moment mindfulness. And that's important. Unless we're in the present moment, we've got no hope of knowing what's happening. But this is asking us to be aware of what I call the 3 times. So there's the present moment, and that's essential. And we're recognizing what's present or not present, what's its nature. But then we're asked to look a little bit to the past, to the conditions that cause this current experience to arise. So again, not with a lot of thinking, I was thinking about that, and then this happened, and this person said that, and I didn't like that, so that happened. But we can know this in a moment, that, I was dwelling on this kind of experience, or I had this pain in my knee and all this aversion came up. Some direct knowing, this was happening, and now this is here, this hindrance or even this beautiful quality of mind or heart. Then in this practice, we're asked to make a decision. How do we respond to this experience? What do we choose to do? Because the power of mindfulness is it creates this choice point. We're not so lost that we're just being in a reactive state, we're just pushing and pulling against experience. We're actually clear and aware that something, say, difficult is happening. We recognize what has been the supportive conditions for that difficult experience. And we have the possibility, the potential for making a wise choice about how we respond. And there's, all kinds of things we can talk about how we might respond. But then we make that choice and we need to check, was that response wise? Did it move us in the direction we want to go in, where the hindrances is lessening, or we're in such a wise relationship to the hindrance, whatever it is, that it's not disturbing us in the same way, or that of the awakening factors, we're actually getting more established in a sense of calm and ease. So these are the 3 times that I think are really skillful for us to keep in mind as meditators. And in this, I think it's really helpful to have what I call post-mortem mindfulness. Again, we're so encouraged to be in the present moment that we kind of can lose track of what was happening and why. We're just on to the next thing. But sometimes it's really helpful, even say once the flood of a hindrance is abated, to look back and get a sense of, why was I so lost in that? Why did that take me over so? Why was that so confusing? And so we can investigate. It's one of the factors of awakening, is investigation. Not, again, dwelling on it, judging ourselves, but with a sense of understanding, wanting to understand why that happened, so that in the future we're more familiar with those tendencies, and the red flag, the warning signs come up earlier. So post-mortem mindfulness after the fact can be really skillful. And in these lists, you can see, especially with the hindrances, the 7 factors, and the 4 noble truths, these are what the Buddha talked about all the time, what you've heard probably many talks about, and if you've done retreats, we always try to bring these in because they're so important. So it's kind of like the greatest hits of the Buddha's teachings. And again, the five aggregates, even if it's not familiar to you, the Buddha spoke about it again and again and again. And people would memorize these lists and memorize these practices. Now, as I said, this is I've done this chart from the text, which you can read. There are lots of copies of this sutta available online. Venerable Analayo, who some of you know, he's a great scholar and practitioner now living in Massachusetts at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. He's really he's probably the foremost scholar on comparative early Buddhist literature, where he looks to see what's central to all of the different texts that have come down in different traditions and languages, and what he sees as present in the different versions. He thinks that is likely that it was more original, more central to the Buddha's teaching. So he actually says that this text has been added to over time, that originally it was just like the five hindrances and the seven awakening factors. But I think there's a case to be made for even if that's so, this is what has come down to us. And the practices, if they were added, make such sense in this context that I value them and think it's helpful for us to know and practice in this way. Because again, this overarching theme that I keep pointing to is so important. Cultivating the wholesome, diminishing this, whatever's causing us suffering. What's a disturbance? What's a place of clinging? Where do we get caught? And then in this current specific experience right now, in the recognition of it, how do we respond wisely so we find more freedom and less suffering? So I'll go through these sections. Again, I know it's a lot. I keep saying that, but just recognizing it, if your steam starts coming out of your ears, just looking at all these words on this page, don't worry about it. Some will feel familiar, some not. That's okay. So the first one is our old friends, the hindrances. Again, most retreats will give a talk, we'll give instructions on working with them. Every retreat you're in, you've probably had restlessness or sleepiness. They're all fairly familiar. And there's some real overlap with, as I said, the third foundation of mindfulness, where we're asked to recognize, are these difficult mind states present? It's a slightly different list, but the essence of them is the same. But here we're asked in the same way, are they present or not present? But then we're asked, and this is from the text, so we'll take the first one, sensual desire. The meditator understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen sensual desire, how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen sensual desire, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned sensual desire. Got that? No. It sounds complicated, but basically I've put it in very simple words in the top boxes there. Just like I was saying in the meditation and in my description of this, the arising of unarisen means the hindrance wasn't here a moment ago, and now it is. The arising of unarisen. So we're going along in our meditation practice, and all of a sudden we just fall over with sleepiness or restlessness or worry or whatever it is. So we're recognizing that it's arisen, and that's its conditioned nature. Conditions came together, it arises. Next, the abandoning of the arisen, say, sensual desire. So it's here, we recognize it. And just as I've been saying, we recognize the conditions that led to its arising, and through that understanding can skillfully work with it. So we can be mindful of it. We can apply an antidote. We can turn to equanimity or one of the Brahmaviharas. So we get to have a toolkit of skillful means, of ways of responding to a difficulty that's arisen. And then the last one is interesting. The future arising comes to be prevented, meaning we are more aware of that kind of difficulty, and we don't put energy into, give attention to the kind of conditions that make it arise. Now, of course, hindrances will always come until we're fully awakened. Some of them will be with us. But as we learn more skills, as we begin to understand our mind more and more, we learn these tools. And this is exactly what this part of the sutra is encouraging us to know. As we learn how to work skillfully with hindrances, they don't take us over as much. And not only do they not take us over, sometimes the hindrances are called the manure for enlightenment. They can actually be our greatest teachers because we learn how to work with these difficulties. And when we have a confidence or a skill around that, we're not so likely to be overwhelmed or especially judgmental. One of the challenges of the hindrances is they just really take us over, and we feel like we can't do this. Greg Scharf, one of my dear colleagues, says something like, I'm not very good at this club. You know, we can just feel we don't know how to do this. It's so complicated for us. So this is telling us that we have the capacity to develop these skills, that the hindrances don't mean we're bad meditators. They will happen. We can learn to work with them in a way that something shifts in us. We grow more confident. Sometimes it's patience and endurance that's needed. You know, these mind states are very familiar for us. So we need to recognize that they will happen, but have some confidence that we can work with them. A good friend, someone who sits retreats at Spirit Rock, has turned to poetry, and he shared with me this poem that I like. It's called Sit by Rob Cook. And it's about his dog and his mind. It says, my dog has got attention deficit disorder, making him a pain to train. Commands of action aren't so difficult. He picked up fetch within a day or two. It's true that come was slower to arrive, but in the end it did succumb to bribes. Commands of stillness are a problem, though. He cannot stand it when I make him sit. He doesn't follow what I mean by heal and isn't getting anywhere with stay. My mind is easily distracted too. It tends to wander off and sniff about and bring me random stuff it comes across, though often it's some half-dead thing that reeks. It barks at everything that passes by, then runs around in circles for a while, or gnaws upon the bone of some old grudge until it's chewed beyond all recognition. This might take a while. Our minds, harder to train than our puppy, but it's possible. This is what the Buddha kept telling us, that with this kind of recognition, we can actually grow our capacity to be with difficult experiences. One of the big challenges in meditation is doubt, which is the last of the hindrances. This is really important to recognize because doubt will undermine our willingness to keep practicing, to try to show up, because it kind of pulls the rug out from under us. And the challenge of it is when we're in it, it feels like it's telling us the truth about ourselves, about our meditation, about the teachers or the teachings, and it's all a problem or someone's fault or something's bad or wrong. And we can just get lost in the swirl of that and not move forward, not believe in our capacity to be fully present. Now, some doubt with a capital D, where it's a sense of inquiry and really looking clearly at experience and knowing what works for us, that's important. I'm talking about the kind of doubt where we just swirl around in our experience. That is debilitating. And Obi knows this. I'm a collector of meditation cartoons. And there are more and more of them that actually speak to our meditation practice. So I like this one. Now, I like that on Zoom, I can, instead of reading it to you, I can show it to you. So here we are in our class. And I don't know if this is what your meditation was like, but it says, I'm meditating on my inability to meditate due to the fact that when I meditate, I can't stop thinking about how I can't meditate because I'm thinking about my inability to meditate. Is that correct? So there we are in the spin cycle without any, in the wash cycle without any emptying out of just questioning, am I doing it right? What's happening? How do I do this? That's doubt, and that's a hindrance. If you can actually recognize not just that these kind of thoughts are happening, but that they are doubt, and then it's a hindrance, this is like a light gets turned on. Can be revelatory. Oh, that's what this is. I've had that experience sometimes, or sometimes in working with someone, and just they're describing their experience and all these thoughts swirling around, and I just say, that's doubt. And they're like, oh, you're right. And in that moment, that shift happens where we're no longer a victim of doubt, but we're seeing it as this conditioned arising that we can have a skillful relationship with, that we can learn from. There's the classic Buddha's teaching where after his enlightenment, Mara, who's the personification of doubt, of evil, of confusion, would keep coming to the Buddha. What was the Buddha's response? I see you, Mara. I see you, Mara. This is what we can say with doubt. And this is when you're practicing the Fourth Foundation of Mindfulness. I see you, Mara. And then we shift from, oh, there's something wrong with me, or something, I'm not doing it right, or something wrong with this practice, to here's this conditioned experience that's very familiar where I'm being self-judgmental or critical of others, and I can know it. I'm not its helpless victim anymore. This is the Fourth Foundation of Mindfulness, practicing with the hindrance of doubt. Really important. So much more I could say about this, but I will stop there and go back to our list because the next section is practicing with the 5 aggregates. Now, just the term aggregate, I should put the Pali in this document. I'll do that for next time. The Pali is Khandha, Khandha, and both in Pali and in English, it feels like a very unfamiliar technical term. What does this even mean? It literally just means bundles or heaps of things that get aggregated together, like a building, like the thing you make roads with. You know, they make roads out of aggregates. It's a kind of geological term for when different types of rock have been compressed together. So it's got this sense of a bundle, but it's also got a sense of being a burden. So there are these 5 aspects of our experience, our very common everyday experience that the Buddha pointed us to. And he says, pay attention here because these are the things that you commonly identify with, as in create a self out of, create an identity of who I am, and cling to. You want to draw them closer, make them yours, manipulate them so you get pleasant ones and don't get unpleasant ones. So the first one is material form. And for the purposes of meditation, that basically means, is referring to our body, our sense of identifying with the body. Very common for most of us. The next one is feeling tone or Vedana. Was also the second foundation of mindfulness. Here it is again. Next one is perception. This is the naming or the recognizing of experience out of our memory and experience, past experience. The next is formations. This is another big basket of things, usually sankharas, usually mental formation, mental volition. So it's all the contents of our minds, moods, thoughts, emotions, images, etc. And then consciousness itself, this capacity for knowing. Each of these, and again, you could give a whole talk on each one of these, or certainly the aggregates as a whole. We could do a whole section on it. It's so important. I just read a whole book on the aggregates called Identity and Experience that was someone's PhD thesis that she turned into a book. Fascinating and incredibly overwhelming on all the different ways the Buddha talked about the aggregates. But let's just keep this simple. Again, for the first one is, so say the body, such is form. This is what my body is like. This is how it came to be this way. So it's just recognizing that the body, like everything else, is a conditioned thing. All of the food I've eaten, the exercise I've done, the accidents and the illnesses and the family conditions, whatever, have led to the body being like this. And this is, it says disappearance, but basically this is how it changes, and this is how it ultimately will end, just like everything else. So it's really seeing the impersonal, impermanent nature of all of these different aspects of the human experience and how we cling to them, try to make them solid and permanent, and they're not. When we understand wisely and relate to the body wisely, it doesn't have to cause us suffering. When we relate to it unwisely, it causes us suffering. So again, a lot more to say about that, but we'll leave that for your own exploration. So the next section, the sense spheres, as I said, in Buddhism, we talk about the 5 physical sense spheres that you're familiar with of eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, sensing physical sensations, but we add the mind. It's also a way that we take in information about the world. And this is what we meditate on, right? This is what we have the focus, be in the body, know the physical sensations, know sounds. We don't so much talk about smells and tastes, but if you're on a retreat, you'll do that in the dining hall as you're eating. But certainly the body and the sights and the sounds and the sensations, this is what we're focusing on in our formal meditation practice or when we're doing walking meditation. And so our practice here is to know that experience. So we know the eye and that seeing is happening. And what are we seeing? Forms. Really what our experience of seeing is, could go into the scientific what's happening, but we're just seeing shape and color, right? And because we can see three-dimensional, we can get a sense of the spatial component, but really it's just shape and color. And then we're asked to recognize the fetter that arises dependent on both. Now, the fetter in this case, there's lots of discussion about what that might mean, but it basically means, just like with the aggregates, where do we get caught? Where do we get pulled into what we're seeing? You know, we are such a visual culture that we get lost in, be pulled into, especially with our online devices. We can just get pulled into getting lost, losing our mindfulness because we're so caught in what we're seeing. It's a place we're commonly lost. So we were talking about the sense spheres. And what I think is so skillful about how the Buddha talks about our relationship to the physical senses and the mind is, at first, just like in the third foundation, we're just asked to recognize, oh, this is happening. I'm seeing or I'm hearing. The object that is being known, the sight, the sound, the smell, the taste, they are not the problem. What's the problem is in this third section where it says, knows the fetter that arises dependent on both. And as I was starting to say, a fetter is any way we get caught into the simplest ways, to wanting, not wanting, or delusion about that experience. So it's very similar to the process with the hindrances. We know, oh, this is how I get caught in seeing or hearing. I love that kind of music or that kind of sound, and I hate the noise of the leaf blower. An aversion arises. So we want to recognize that. And again, if it's a fetter implies it's a painful suffering experience. So in the same way, in the next section, just like in the hindrances, we want to start to learn, how do I not have that unskillful response automatically? If something's, pulls me in, how do I not get immediately caught? Or if something's, I'm aversive to it, how do I find more balance? But if it has arisen, how do I let that go? How do I let that go? So it's the same process again. So this is the theme that I want to keep pointing to, that's so important. It's not the object that's the issue, and it's not like we can't appreciate and enjoy things. It's when a fetter arises, where we have this relationship of greed, aversion, or delusion about things. And we, as I said, we are such a visual culture that we can just get caught in, even in seeing, all of going places. There's whole industries now, 1,000 things to see before you die, and bucket lists, and people wanting to see the latest movie, though at the moment going to movies isn't that appealing, but it certainly was the case. It's like people lining up to see a movie. The movie is not going to change whether you see it today or tomorrow, but this attachment to seeing things. And so in our meditation practice and in life, we want to recognize, where do we get caught around these objects of the senses? And what's a wiser response? How can we learn from that so we don't cause ourselves suffering? And also so we don't get pulled into the, what's it called? Can't think of the word, but just getting more stuff, basically. Oh, we see this, you can buy that. We now, with the click of a button, something can be delivered to our house. I mean, in big cities, they're getting it down to even in hours. The consumption that can come from that. Like, what's a wise response to the experiences of the senses? So again, a lot could be said about that and skillful relationship, but keep a sense of this theme. And then the next in the list are the awakening factors. Again, these beautiful qualities of mind and heart that get developed 3 energizing ones, 3 calming ones, with mindfulness always present or balancing them. Like the third foundation of mindfulness, we're asked to know, are they present or not present? As I said earlier, we're not so encouraged, or sometimes don't give ourselves permission to recognize that, oh, these beautiful qualities are there. There's tranquility or concentration or energy, rapture. Again, they can be quite subtle, but in moments of quiet in your meditation, some aspects of some of these would have been present. Learning to recognize them is the beginning of helping to encourage them to deepen and grow. Recognizing when they're not present. Again, this is a little more complicated, but especially as we really tune into meditation practice and deepen in it, sometimes knowing what's not present. I mean, we talk about balancing these factors, that the calming factors and the energizing factors need to come into balance. So we need to know what's not present. And in the same way, like the hindrances, we want to know how to encourage. If a factor isn't present, how do we encourage it to arise? So just taking the first one, mindfulness. People always ask, why do I get lost? I was attending away, being with the breath or being with current experience, and then I'm just gone for minutes or many minutes. Why does that happen? I actually think what's more interesting is, why do you come back? How does mindfulness that wasn't there, you were lost in some fantasy or delusion, how do you come back into mindfulness? That's the real art of meditation. Unfortunately, there's no real way. Because if you're really in delusion, as my friend, colleague Richard Shagma said, what's the practice when you're lost in delusion? Unfortunately, there isn't one, because delusion is running the show. We have to somehow trust our momentum of mindfulness for another moment of mindfulness to arise. There's this great quote, I've heard it attributed to different people. It says enlightenment, but you could say the same about mindfulness. Enlightenment is an accident. Retreats make us accident prone. So you could say that about mindfulness. Mindfulness, it's not an accident, but retreats and practice make it accident prone. As in, the more moments of mindfulness we have, the more likely there'll be subsequent moments of mindfulness. And then the next stage is that whatever that quality is, the word here is perfected, means that it has been so developed that it is sustained. It is always accessible for us. And this is basically when they're called awakening factors, because they lead to full awakening. But just to recognize that potential for ourselves through the recognition of these wholesome states, of these qualities in our meditation practice. And so I've heard people say that just being mindful and recognizing it, it's inherently satisfying. There's something rewarding or leading to a sense of well-being of knowing we're present, knowing we know what's happening. And we need to recognize that, even celebrate that, not to diminish that. So, again, a lot more to say about that. And then lastly, in this section is included the Four Noble Truths. Now, again, many of you may be familiar with this very central teaching that the Buddha taught as the first serious teaching he gave after he was awakened. This is what he chose to convey, what he understood. He framed it as the Four Noble Truths, which are the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, which is craving, the possibility of the end of suffering, and a path to the end of suffering, which is the Eightfold Path. What's interesting is to see this listed here as a way of practice. And again, this may be different or new for you, but why I think it's so interesting, instead of just the Four Noble Truths being, a philosophy that you think, oh, that's a great idea, or I see, that makes sense. It's like, no, see in your direct experience, if something difficult is happening, to recognize, oh, this is suffering. That gives us a different relationship to the experience. Right there. To know the origin of suffering, again, like with the hindrances, why is this suffering here? How has it come about? What are the causes that created this suffering? If we can understand the causes, we have the possibility of unwinding, diminishing those causes, not indulging in them, not getting caught in them. And then the third noble truth, or the third practice, is to know that it's possible for suffering to end. And again, it's talking about in this moment. And it might be a temporary ending, but to recognize that whatever state of conflict, of angst, of disturbance, of suffering we were in, when it ends, we are relieved of that suffering. Could be completely temporary. It might come back in a moment or in a day or in a week. But to recognize the ending of suffering in a moment, there's a freedom in that, or it's very faith endowing. And of course, it's also talking about the possibility of the total ending of suffering as the Buddha described. But we need to also know it in a moment. And how do we get to that ending of suffering? Through the Eightfold Path. Which is this amazing teaching about how we can skillfully cultivate Sila Samadhi Panya, our ethical conduct, our meditation practice and understanding, so we don't keep causing ourselves suffering. One of the skills we start to see, or one of the insights we can have, is how often we are the cause of our own suffering. We want to look outside, we want to blame other people, we want to blame situations. Sometimes we do want to blame ourselves, but in a very aversive, judgmental way. But if we can see how our mind creates our own suffering, there's an enormous capacity or potential for freedom. I heard this phrase from Sylvia, and I don't know if she made it up, but she said something like, pain is inevitable, as in the pain of old age, sickness, and death, but suffering is optional. And then I found this cartoon. And as I said, meditation cartoons are getting more and more common. For me, it's hidden a little, but it's a doctor is removing a mole from a very unhappy looking patient and saying, as I remove this mole, remember that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. But the kicker is the title down in the bottom right, she's a dermatologist. And I think we all need to go to the dermatologist to learn this lesson about how we create our own suffering through our tendency to fixate, cling, grasp, and that there's a possibility with that letting go, even in a moment, of finding freedom here and now. So this is the intent, again, I repeat, of the Fourth Foundation, coming into a clear recognition of what's happening, naming it, putting it in one of these categories, and within these categories, it can map onto any experience we might be having, to understand how it got to be, what the causes and conditions are that led to its arising, and then how to, if it's a wholesome one, to embody, encourage, cultivate, maintain that experience. And if it's a difficult negative one where we're beset by disturbances or clinging, how to let that go. So it's a whole practice of skillful means. And what I think is really important is to recognize that in our meditation practice, it's not a passive practice. The Buddha just doesn't say, and we can hear this. I'm exaggerating, but it's just like, oh, this bad experience is happening. Oh well, just endure it because it will change. Or this good experience is happening. Oh well, it's impermanent. Don't get attached to it because it's going to go. So there is truth to that, but we want to be more engaged with that. The Buddha again and again said, if something difficult, unskillful is happening, you want to recognize that. You want to know how to practice with that, and you want to learn from that about how to not be so entangled next time. And if it's something positive, you want to recognize that and know how to increase that, how to support that, how to create the conditions so that's more likely to happen. And this is the key, again, that I think many of you may be already doing without knowing that this is the framework of the Fourth Foundation. This is where this way of practice comes from, and that you're probably doing more than you might think. So this gradual progression from steadying with the mind and body, growing some sense of capacity to be present for our changing experience, to know the push and pull of the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, the feeling tone, Vedana, to begin to understand our minds, and in this very equanimous, non-judgmental way, get to know the nature of the mind, what's present, what's not present. And now in this fourth foundation of fourth foundation of mindfulness, really bringing all the skills, all the potential for um, a wise response to experience into possibility. And so this map that the Buddha has created for us, I think it's awesome. And he didn't have Wikipedia to reference. He didn't have an Excel spreadsheet or a database to put all this together. It was directly from his own experience of what helped him find freedom. And so lastly, I want to end with what is the last of this sutta. It's called The Prediction. And I love that he ends us, as he's gone through all of these different teachings. He says, if anyone should develop these four satipatthanas in such a way for 7 years, I mean, that's a long time, but it's not that long in the scheme of our practice. One of two fruits could be expected for them. Either final knowledge here and now, or if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning. He's going through the stages, the traditionally 4 stages of awakening, let alone 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months, half a month. If anyone should develop these 4 satipatthanas in such a way for 7 days, 7 days, one of two fruits could be expected for them. Either final knowledge here and now, or if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning. So it was in reference to this was said. Basically saying if you practiced in this way for 7 days, you would either become fully enlightened or get to the 3rd stage of awakening of these 4 high stages. So we often say, enlightenment guaranteed, 7-day retreat, all you need right here. The bar is high though. I think it's every moment, full mindfulness of all of these different aspects of experience. But this is what the Buddha said. This is the possibility. He found freedom through practicing in this way. And he gave us these are teachings, meditation instructions straight from the Buddha, as best we know, to us about how to practice. So, as I said, this is the Cliff's Notes version, a a big overview going through these teachings. I know it's going to feel overwhelming if it's new for you, but keep coming back to this theme of agency in your meditation practice. Skillful response to experience, starting with recognition, naming, and then is it skillful or unskillful? Am I being caught, lost, disturbed, suffering around this? Or is this something wholesome, skillful? And how do I respond? It's giving us tools, it's giving us confidence that this path is something we can know and walk on and learn from and grow in and find freedom in.